Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this morning's Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity Affordable Housing Summit. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to first say thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of those in attendance, and thank you for our amazing panelists today. I'm really excited about the affordable housing conversation, and so I know today's panel will bring you some information that will be really helpful. My name, your guide through this virtual universe today in this summit, my name is Jolie Angel Robinson. I'm the VP of Government Affairs and Public Policy here at Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity. I joined the team not too long ago, October of 2019, after focusing on community engagement for almost 8 years at the Dallas Police Department. In that time, I was able to be a part of not only the affordable housing conversation, but public education as well. So many of our panelists today will be talking about affordable housing. We'll be talking about the economics of it. Panel 2 will really dive into those that are kind of doing direct service in the affordable housing or fair housing or equitable housing space. And so it's just an amazing opportunity for us to hear from those individuals, hear about the work that they're doing in our city, the city of Dallas. I know some people, have different names for this affordable housing conversation. Some people call it workforce housing, so you may hear that term this morning as well. Some people refer to it as equitable access to housing, and you'll probably hear from some of the panelists what that really means about equitable access to housing, which is absolutely necessary for us to discuss as well. A few housekeeping. I have my trusty dusty notes and agenda so I don't forget anything this morning. So you'll see me look down just so that I am sure we're having a great time. Someone is going to be monitoring the chat if you have any questions. So, please don't hesitate to enter any questions that you may have in the chat. We're also going to be recording today's summit. This recording will be up on our Dallas Area Habitat website so that people can go back and reference it. Perhaps some people aren't able to join us this morning, so they'll be able to pull this summit video from our Dallas Area Habitat website. We'll have a Q&A portion after each of the speakers. After you hear, for example, Councilmember Chad West, there'll be a portion at the end of his time that'll be a little bit of Q&A. There's some prompts that I have that I'm going to be asking some of them, but perhaps there's some questions that we'll see in the chat that bubble up to the top that seem to be great questions that we should ask our panelists at that time. We want to be sure that everything gets covered as much as possible during this time. Again, like I said, we'll be recording this. You'll be able to see on the website. We know that some people registered and they're interested in becoming a Dallas Area Habitat homeowner. Yay for you. We're excited that you are interested in becoming a Dallas Area Habitat homeowner. The process for doing that, today's summit really is focused on the conversation around affordable housing, the economics of that, and direct service. But if you're interested in becoming a Dallas Area Habitat homeowner, you can check out our website. It gives you a full process, step 1, step 2, step 3. We have an amazing homeowner services team that can walk you through the process of what that looks like. Again, it's added in the chat. You can visit us on the website to become a Dallas Area Habitat homeowner. Next, you'll be hearing from our amazing CEO, Mr. Dave Crawford. He'll share a few words of hello and welcome, and he'll also talk a little bit about the importance of affordable housing. I want you to welcome to this virtual stage, Mr. Dave Crawford. If you have some coffee or whatever, give a round of applause for Mr. Dave Crawford.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jolie, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I want to make sure my camera is on. Thank you all for joining us this morning for this outstanding Affordable Housing Summit. This is a critically important conversation, as evidenced by over 500 attendees here this morning. Dallas Area Habitat is thankful for this opportunity to convene such a wonderful group of panelists. I want to thank them for their help this morning, but more importantly, to thank them for their continued efforts to positively impact our community. For those of you who don't know, Dallas Area Habitat has been working in the affordable housing space since 1986, and we've successfully helped over 2,000 families transition from renters to homeowners. Homeownership has and does lead to generational wealth, and owning a home has shown to have positive impact on an individual's overall health as well as the community. Let me share a recent example with you. Last year, 37 Habitat families paid off their mortgage. Now, they came to Habitat with a desire to change their trajectory in life. They had their own dreams of owning a home. Most had poor credit, very little equity for down payment, but they did have a steady job and a desire to own a home. Habitat was able to help them with their financial education, down payment assistance through the family's sweat equity in the construction process. But these families, these homeowners, they qualified and paid for the house. The mortgage was theirs. They did not receive a free house. So let's fast forward to their current story. As I mentioned, 37 families this past year successfully paid off their mortgage. The result? They walked away with $5.9 million in equity and home values in excess of $6.5 million. That's an average equity per family of $160,000. They came in with very little, and they have today a transformational success for themselves and their future family generations. So we invite you to be a part of the Habitat journey in the life of these Dallas families and our future Dallas families. So stay connected with Dallas Habitat, advocate, donate, and of course, volunteer. So I invite you to enjoy today's panel. I know I will. Thank you all.
Great to hear from Dave and the story about some of the Dallas Habitat residents and homeowners and families that have been impacted. We're going to dive right into our first panel. You'll first hear from Councilmember Chad West. He serves District 1 and was the previous chair of the Housing and Homelessness Solutions Committee. In the recent weeks, that duty of chair of that committee has been moved over to Councilmember Casey Thomas. But you'll hear from Councilmember Chad West. He'll be sharing an overview of the comprehensive housing policy and some other information with us as well. Then you'll hear from Dr. Clark. I heard him on a panel probably a month or two ago and was absolutely blown away by his intelligence and the conversation around economics and affordable housing. He's the director of the Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative. So let's give Chad West a welcome as he joins us on the panel this morning.
Thank you, Jolie. Glad to be here with my friends from Habitat this morning and everybody who's tuned in today. And thank engagement and interest in affordable housing. It is a critical need of the city of Dallas, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows. And Jolie, if it's all right, I've got a short presentation I'd like to share.
That's perfect. You should be able to share screen.
Excellent. All right, let's try this. You know, one time I started a Zoom call. It was when this all first, and I had about 40 people sitting in the weight room, and I didn't realize there was a weight room. About 15 minutes into my presentation, I'm like, what's going on here? Where is everybody? So I'm starting to figure out technology slowly here. All right, here we go. All right, so Habitat had asked me to kind of cover some of the basics of what our comprehensive housing policy at the city of Dallas is all about, and talk about, you know, what we've done in the past, what seems to be working and what isn't working, and I think most importantly, you know, where we're going in the future. So just a basic primer, which is probably elementary to everyone on this call, but I think it's to at least touch on. The industry definition, which most people accept, of affordable housing is that it's housing that occupants can afford to pay for using no more than 30% of their gross incomes. And that includes, you know, your rent or mortgage and your utilities. It's the HUD's definition. According to our most recent census data, which is not, of course, the most current census, but it's older data. Percent of Dallas households pay more than 30% of their income, and 20% spend more than 50% of their income to have a home. So it just shows you the need that we have to sort of fill that gap where we can. As of 2019, and I've got to credit this information to the average, which is used to kind of base how we're doing on affordability. That's your average median family income. And what we see is the average median family income for the region at 100 is the 100% line, which is in gray. And for a single person, $60,000. For a family of three, $77,580. You can kind of see where that falls on that income range. What the city of Dallas specifically looks to do with our comprehensive housing policy is to address everything from the 0% AMI, which is really people who have no income and need housing and public support completely for homes, all the way up to the roughly 120% area median income. As you'll see on the next slide, well, not this slide, but in a couple slides, we'll talk about how our policies break down into each of those categories. Here's an example of some wages and different professions that are tied to income levels. So you can see a starting teacher and a starting firefighter or police officer. It actually falls within our affordable. You go down into the lower ranges, 80% and below. You're going to get your mail carriers, your medical techs, your folks who are really keeping our workforce going. And what a challenge that we run into a lot when we're trying to educate neighborhoods and communities that are usually a little bit more affluent is affordable housing does not mean housing. You know, a lot of people, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, and a lot of folks who don't talk about this every day, they fall into this trap of thinking, when I hear the word affordable, it means I'm getting of housing I don't want there. And which, putting that, is a whole different conversation. It's very important to educate people on affordable housing, workforce housing. It's what's needed for the vast majority of the population in Dallas. And we've got to work together to get that done. And you got to open your hearts and your minds to accept that. All right, some of our policy wins from the last couple of years. Before my time on council, I was elected in 2019, but the previous council had a first comprehensive housing policy in the city of Dallas. So as a city, for all that history in the past, we never had a policy. We just kind of would take money from HUD, put it out there. We had some, our own internal sort of workings, but there was not a comprehensive policy that everyone worked from. And so very proud to have that. And we could talk a little more about, where we might want to see that going in the future too. And I definitely want to hear the other speakers' opinions on that. Data from my time as chair, which is the last time we really kind of pulled all the numbers together. So from one calendar year of October to October, we passed 4 new housing policies, and we confirmed the production of either saving homes, so protecting the stock we have now, which is very important, to building new homes, 2,626 affordable homes within that year period. Now, if anybody who has heard the data that came out from the feds a few years ago, the city needs roughly 20,000 more affordable homes right now to be able to house what we have, not counting growing what we need in the future. So 2,626, I was proud of that number. A small chip in what we actually need in the city. This third bullet is a little technical and wonky, but I will say mixed income development bonuses. This was a policy that was passed. I worked on it, had the pleasure to work on it when I was in the Plan Commission, and it was passed after that time. It basically says if you're a builder and you're building multifamily units, If you want to build a little bit wider, a little bit higher, you can maybe make it a little more dense than zoning allows. We'll let you do that if you put in some affordability and you actually give us some real affordability, not, 2 or 3 units. You give us a significant amount of your units in your apartment complex are going to be designated for people who make 50,000 a year, 60,000 a year, 30,000 a year. We didn't see a lot of movement early on, right when that was first passed, but it's starting to ramp up. We had 8 zoning cases approved within a year, and what I'm hearing from staff, and I don't have the data to back it up, but what they're telling me is that that is exponentially growing, that we're seeing more and more of that, and that's becoming more popular. Recently, this last year, we passed a public facilities corporation, which is a fancy term for basically something that will allow the city to wipe out the property taxes for a development if it puts in affordability. So your property taxes are wiped out for 5, 10, 20 years, as long as you maintain 20%, 50% affordability. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. You've got to have the projects vetted. You got to make sure, everybody wins here. The developer's got to make some money, right? Or they're not going to do it. And the community's got to have this affordability. So it's another tool we have to help pay for affordability. This side on the tax reduction side. And then something I'm really particularly proud of is our 1,000 unit affordable housing challenge, which I'll talk about in a minute. These are the policy tools I referenced a couple minutes ago. So the city, if you think about that line of 100% affordability, $60,000 for a single person, that's your 100%. So the vast majority of our programs are targeting the levels below that. So 80% and below. You got your low income housing tax credit, your we call it LIHTC. And that is a federal program, and it's essentially our most widely used and most, when you see the numbers, it's the most successful tool we have right now to get in the city of Dallas. We have, of course, our vouchers. We have ability to issue bonds. We've got our CDBG, Community Development Block Grant funding. We have TIFs, tax increment financing districts that can put money into it, which there's some challenges with that right now. We've got our land bank, and I've talked about the mixed income development bonus. For the higher levels of AMI, we don't have as many tools for that at this time. Of the 2,626 new homes that I referenced previously, you can see, on that second bullet there, the vast majority of those are LIHTC units, and that's just because it's been the biggest tool we've had in the past. It's not a new tool we've had access to for a long time, and it really lends itself to the public-private partnership. So the industry is kind of my point, pushes that out more than the city. So it's more efficient and it's more viable. The other items are really, kind of what we've come up with within the city tools itself. The 1,000 unit affordable housing challenge is something that's near and dear to my heart. It touches on efficiency in government. It touches on equity. It touches on transportation. It touches on having people essentially have the opportunity to live close to everything they need. It is the challenge for mixed income development. So not consolidated low income or not all market rate, but a mixed income. So you got your market rate mixed in with your some percentage level of affordable within of a train station that's operated by DART, and within on city or DART owned land that is underutilized. If you can believe it, we have hundreds of acres within the city of Dallas that are not being used right now for anything. They're vacant lands, vacant lots that we as a city are not only not collecting tax revenue on, we're also paying to maintain those lots every single day. And it's a huge misuse of a resource, in my opinion. the aggressiveness of this particular project. So it's seeking 1,000 affordable units, which will mean you're going to have much more units than that. You're going to have a lot of market rate mixed in there too, right? But at least 1,000 units, and all construction permits issued by August 31st of this year. That was a challenge. Staff has informed me recently it's not going to be, it's not totally doable, but we are going to be pretty close to getting those permits issued. So I'm pretty excited about that. What I love about it, as I mentioned, is if we can put people near train stations where they can walk to train stations and then possibly take a train to work, and then also give incentives within these developments to have it near grocery stores, have it near other services like childcare. It might open up the possibility don't have to have a car or don't use it as much. And it might give people the opportunity to actually not have to make these long, crazy commutes. I just think it's cool. It spreads out affordability all throughout the entire city. Challenge. Our standing NOFA is, this is something I'm particularly proud of city staff on. We had a NOFA that was a rolling. We would request essentially already projects through the city and ask for multifamily and single family projects and request for help from the city. It would only happen occasionally, right? You'd have a few times during the year you could come request funds for these projects. Well, now that we're doing you can come do it anytime. We have more funding for it. We can move projects more quickly. All right. And to kind of wrap up, we have some other significant work items. We have reopened the parking code of the city of Dallas as of last year. And why is that relevant to housing? For multifamily, particularly, it's relevant because your average parking space costs, for a underground parking, it's roughly $30-something thousand. For above ground parking, it's roughly $20-something thousand. And for a surface space, it's around $8,000. If you can wipe requirements, parking spaces for some of these multifamily projects, you can potentially lower the price of their units or to offer a certain percentage that's affordable. Right now, the zoning requires that it park every bedroom in a house, so in an apartment. So let's say you have a 2-bedroom apartment, an adult in one room and a child in the other. You got to have 2 parking spaces for that unit. I mean, that is an outdated parking code that we have. So the city planning commissions, we're looking at ways we can leverage. Hey, if we give you, Mr. Builder, a reduction in your parking, how much affordability can you give us? And building that tool into the parking code so that they don't have to come to city council to ask for it all the time. It's built in, it's more efficient. And then we're doing a citywide land use study that is going to look at land use across the city. As you might be aware, or you probably are aware, the redlining of the past is what has pushed the low-income housing into areas of the South. We've got to change that, and the way to change that is to open up a study about land use. And I would just say, in closing, on what does the future look like? To me, you can deficit. We're producing, and in 1 year, 26 new units. We need 20,000 at a minimum. We think we need more. We as a city, we can't do it by ourselves. Our private and nonprofit partners like Habitat, which is such a, I know James Armstrong's on here with Builders of Hope, great partner. They're doing the Lord's work here, but we got to do more. We've got to find ways to better, as a city, to better leverage the private partnerships that we have, the nonprofit partnerships that we have. And I'm hoping to hear that from the discussion today. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. That was extremely informative. A couple of questions, and I'll keep it short. One of the questions I saw in the chat for the 1,000-unit project around DART, unused property, is there any specific place that we're looking at? Is that still in the conversation? Do you have an answer for that one?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. I don't have the data with me, but I will tell you that staff has presented to Pierre Chaco in the Planning and Urban Design Department of the city, has presented to us, council, I think 3 or 4 sites that they've looked at um, in terms of, I think one is down by UNT. There is, because there's a lot of city-owned land down there. The Westmoreland Station it's the last station on the road. It's got some city-owned land there as well. The other 2 I can't remember, except I think there's one by the VA hospital. So they're mostly in the south, but that's simply because right now that's where we have the most land available. They're trying to meet the challenge, but we're encouraging them to do it throughout the whole city. If we can get DART to come to the table and offer up some land and some of these underparked parking lots, we'll get better.
So one last question, it's about how can residents, how can folks on that are attending the summit today, how can they remain connected and understanding what's happening? How can they be advocates and even hold the city accountable for the housing policy plan and the progress on that? Can you give those attendees an information about that? And someone's asking if you could also add your contact information to the chat, please. And again, everybody,
I would happily. Yeah.
We'll be posting the presentation on the Dallas Area Habitat website. I'll get that from all of our panelists today, and we'll have that posted to the Dallas Area website. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think you're doing everything you need to be doing by being here to start. This is fun, which is just showing up, learning about what is affordable housing, what affordable housing is not. If you want to dip your toe deeper, you should come to, the city, I'm not going to tell you to read the comprehensive housing policy because it is like reading a manual on how to put together a radio. That's one of our problems, right? I said, Jolie, no, she's read it. And it's really technical and it's a great playbook for staff, but what it's not is a visionary document that is inspiring. Go look at Atlanta's affordable housing plan. It's fantastic. And we as a city, I think that's the next step. We need to look at doing that. But if you want to dip your toe in, glance at that document, at least the headlines, and read what you can, and maybe do it over a couple of days. I had to. And then come and watch some of Dallas's housing committee meetings, which are posted online. Come check them out. It's really easy to do if you're at home, and get to just watch the processes we go through there. And then if you want to you want to jump in and dive in and really start getting wet with the process, I would follow a multifamily low-income housing tax credit case from the beginning to the end of the process. So when it goes to CPC, because a lot of times you got to go to the plans. A lot of times they're new builds and they're going into areas that need to change the zoning. So get with your council member and say, hey, tell me when you got a LIHTC case coming up in your district, and then follow it from the Plan Commission. Watch what the Plan Commission does. Go to their meeting and watch. Log in, watch them. Watch it come to council, and very important, go to the community meetings and listen to the community concerns on, which we hear it every time. We don't want welfare housing, and then we got to educate folks about that and what this means and why it's so important. So. All that, and then you'll be up to speed with a lot of us on council if you just sit through one of those and you really pay attention and get to know it. That's what I do for now. And then once you get it, you can really hold your council member and your elected officials accountable, because you could say, no, I know the process, and here's the process, and here's why this project should go here or not here. Long answer to a short question.
No. It was perfect. Thank you so much, Councilmember Chad West, for your time this morning. This has been extremely helpful. Thank you for the amazing questions, everyone in attendance. We're going to move right on to our next panelist, Dr. Cullum Clark. You see his face already popping up there. He's with SMU, the Bush Institute Economic Growth Initiative, really has some pivotal and important things to say about the economics of affordable housing, which is a part of the great conversation and oftentimes can mitigate what Councilmember West was mentioning about the negatives that people sometimes see about affordable housing. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Clark.
Robinson, thank you for having me. And first, let me just say I'm honored to be with everyone. I've been a big fan of the great work that Habitat has been doing in Dallas and indeed nationally for many years. been in you all's Restore and in your office quite a few times. So keep up the great work. You're really doing important things. So I have no slides. I'm just going to talk to you all today. I'm going to talk to you all about the economics of housing affordability a little bit. So what I want to do is address 4 topics. First, I want to talk a little bit about why affordability is so important. Second of all, what are the sort of the major policy issues at stake? What does cities need to get right to create reasonable affordability? Third, I want to talk a little bit about why this is so hard, and to recognize the very steep climb that Councilman West and his colleagues and all of our policymakers in Dallas have. Not to be pessimistic, but we have to be realistic. And fourth, just a little bit of an analysis of how is our city actually doing. So first of all, why is it important? Now, some of this may be glaringly obvious, but let me sort of push on the topic for just a moment. We can certainly start by saying that for a family that is sufficiently low income, that essentially every little bit that their housing price goes up imposes a greater hardship. So first of all, it's basically just an issue of how tough are the circumstances of the individual family going to be. And I think that morality alone calls out that when we have in some sense gone so wrong, not just in Dallas, but as a society on housing affordability for low income Americans, we really have a moral need to do better. But let me, like I said, push on the topic a little bit and suggest that housing affordability is really, really important to economic mobility, to upward mobility for the next generation. It's critical to stopping cycles of intergenerational poverty over time. 3 basic points I want to make on this. The first is that if a family is severely housing cost burdened, if they're spending, as Councilman West said, 50 or more % of their income, I think that we can safely say that they'll be generating essentially no savings at all. They will use up essentially all of their income paying for the basics of life. And in our economy, in most economies, but certainly in America to a heightened degree, some degree of savings are absolutely critical to stabilizing the finances of a family and creating opportunities for the next generation. Savings create the ability just to do basic things that make all the difference, for example, for the next generation. There was a study from economists at the University of Pittsburgh that showed that kids from families with just a little bit of positive net worth had a dramatically higher probability of going to and attending 4-year colleges than kids from families who had 0 net worth. Well, about 40% of American families have 0 or negative net worth. So we're talking about almost half the population where the probability of attending college is dramatically reduced when the family has essentially no liquid net worth at all. So the ability to generate savings, really important. Second point, housing affordability is critical to creating more homeowners. And one thing I really want to compliment Habitat on is that you all have been so long in the business, not just of creating housing units, critically important, but actually also creating owners. And that's really important. I know I probably preach to the choir with a lot of people in the group today when I say that housing ownership has been the backbone of wealth accumulation for the American middle class for generations. I don't think that's likely to change. And restoring what really was for a long time a central national priority on increasing homeownership rates, financially sustainable homeownership rates. That's really, really important. And housing is key to doing that. And also a great deal of evidence, by the way, shows the single biggest obstacle to increased homeownership among low to moderate income families is the price of homes. There's a lot of mythology out there, like millennials and maybe the next generation behind, Gen Zers, don't care about homeownership as much anymore, that they want to spend their money on other stuff. Overwhelming survey evidence, both in Dallas and nationally, shows that that's absolutely false, that the aspirations of young people really haven't frankly changed at all from generation to generation. The single biggest problem is they can't afford it. Third point is that that home ownership homeownership in a community isn't just about the actual financial wealth accumulation. It's about larger things. Homeownership in a community changes the behavior of the community. For example, studies show that families who own their home accumulate greater non-housing wealth, all else equal, given the same income level over time. Now, that's a remarkable fact, because some people who have said, oh, we should move on from homeownership, it's obsolete, will say, well, you know what families really should do is take that money they would have put into a down payment and put it into stocks. Well, typically the lower income family, as you all know, doesn't actually make a very large down payment anyway. They're not going to get very far with the stocks that they would buy, to be frank. But beyond that, what's really striking is that once they own their home, they actually take a longer view of the future. They become better savers, better stewards of their own financial future. Moreover, they also become better, in some sense, more engaged citizens. Neighborhoods with high ownership rates, even given the same income level, have lower crime rates, higher high school completion rates, more success for the kids who grow up there. So in general, it's really, really important. So key point, affordability is the key to creating more financial stability on the part of our citizens, more ownership, more intergenerational wealth accumulation, and yet we've been going in the wrong way for quite some time in Dallas. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Second thing I want to talk about is the major policy issues. And I think we're very fortunate in all the work that Councilman West and a lot of great city leaders and city staffers have been doing in recent times. We I think have clearly done more work heading in the right direction the last couple of years than probably in a great many years before that put together. So thank you all for that. But I do want to suggest here that it's really important that everyone be clear on the distinction between two separate areas of public policy that each are really important things to get right. One side is to create a high degree of affordability in a city requires a great deal of market rate housing production. The city has to be good at creating new housing supply that keeps up with demand all up and down the income spectrum, all kinds of, all product types, single family, multifamily, big, small, the works, independent of what we classically call affordable housing, which in some more narrow sense means subsidized by government or the nonprofit sector and so forth. And so let me emphasize this first point, the importance of actually having adequate supply growth in market rate housing. What study after study has shown is that when a city has a sufficiently good supply-demand balance, when supply is keeping up with demand, then that has positive effects on that. That's good news for price, and that price effect filters all through the market. So studies overwhelmingly support the idea that if we were creating a very robust supply of, you could call it market rate workforce housing, kind of affording the, essentially housing the middle class, the working class of Dallas, that will make all housing more affordable. And cities need to be good at that. But what we actually have in practice in America, and certainly I think in our own city, is that cities all over America have struggled with creating enough supply to keep up with growing demand for all kinds of reasons. So I'm going to come back to how Dallas is doing that on that in a moment, but it's really important thing to keep clear that cities, in fact, I would argue one of the most the top priorities of any city government anywhere in the world should be making sure that it manages land use and housing policies in such a way that housing supply can keep up with demand, so that prices don't spiral upwards relative to incomes. Now, the other side is about affordable housing in the narrower sense, that it is in some sense subsidized by government or the nonprofit sector. And I think here's the important thing from an economist point of view to say. We need to understand that left to its own devices, there is no reason to expect that a free market economy will produce housing that our lowest income residents can afford. Why is that? Very simple reason. Because we are a wealthy society, and we have long ago decided in Dallas and all over our country that there is some minimum standard of housing quality below which we will not allow. We will basically say it's not in compliance with code and we won't allow it to exist. In lower income countries around the world, where the rules are much less tough, what you see, anyone who's been to a lot of like the poorer cities of the world, you see vast shanty towns where the lowest income residents are living in, in housing units that essentially are like cinder blocks with corrugated tin roofs or mud huts and this sort of thing. We don't allow that in America. We set a minimum standard, and the minimum standard has there's some cost of land, labor, and materials to build to that standard, and there just isn't any reason to think that that's going to actually be affordable to our lowest income people. And as Councilman West said, we could pretty well say probably at least a third of the residents of the city of Dallas can't afford a home that is built to the minimum standard that law requires today. So that's a basic problem. So we have to actually all the time be thinking, okay, we know we need to create more units that are in fact affordable to lower income people, but this is inherently really, really hard. It's a really expensive proposition. For government money to build a new affordable unit for a family is probably one of the most expensive things government could possibly do for that family. Vastly more expensive than paying for a certain amount of higher education for the children in that family. Vastly more expensive than most anything else that it does. So we face a fundamental resource problem. And what that means is we have to be really smart about stretching every dollar as far as we can. And I can get real wonky and technical. And I will say, Councilman West, that I am, along with Ms. Robinson, one of the people who actually has read the comprehensive housing policy from cover to cover and read a lot of other wonky things like that. But I think the important thing is to recognize we have to be really smart about stretching the dollars. So let's come back to that. Third big point I want to talk about is, why is it so hard? Okay, a couple points I want to make here. One point is it's important to understand that successful cities create a great deal of competition for a very scarce resource, which is space in the city. Urban space is in great demand. And when the city is prospering, when it is growing, and we've been fortunate that on the whole, the city of Dallas is growing, the population's growing, the economy is growing, people have wanted to live here, they've been moving into the city and certainly into the metropolitan area from around the country, huge influx from California, for example. When people want to be here, they are in effect competing for scarce space, and that drives up the price. That creates a very, very powerful force, which is countering anything the city might do to try to, for example, help lower income residents stay where they are, to create new affordable housing when developers could readily see that that same land could profitably be used to build more luxury housing. So it's important to recognize this scarcity and this competition. It's also important to recognize that a lot of things that we talk about these days are a kind of competition. I mean, there's some ugly words out there. NIMBYism, not in my backyard, certainly a challenge. But I think we do need to recognize that NIMBYism can have very, base and ugly motives. It also can simply be a matter of people having a very ordinary human response. I like my home and my neighborhood the way it is, and I want it to stay this way. That's not that unusual, if you will. It seems to be kind of hardwired in, and in a sense, that is a form of competition for space too. And in a sense, people have to be won over bit by bit. This is not easy. Another thing that makes it hard is that there is competition for capital. There's only so much private capital floating around looking for opportunities, and it will go to where it is treated best. It'll go to where it has the best opportunity to make a reasonable profit. So we have to recognize that private capital can't be just sort of drafted, pulled kicking and screaming into building affordable housing in the city of Dallas. As Councilman West said, it has to offer a reasonable rate of return. And we need to recognize that in the greater Dallas area, city of Dallas is what, 1.3 something million people. The greater DFW area is approaching 8 million. There are so many opportunities in other smaller cities all over the metropolitan area. Indeed, I would suggest that probably every other city, including Fort Worth in the metropolitan area, is an easier place to build new housing for private capital. So one has to be kind of pretty sensitive about what private capital actually, what it needs in order to do business in Dallas, because government certainly can't do all that alone. Fourth point I want to talk about is how is Dallas actually doing? Well, just some basic stats. The Dallas area, the metropolitan area as a whole, has historically had a big competitive advantage in terms of having better housing affordability than a lot of other big metropolitan areas. But it's important to note that even at the level of the metropolitan area, we've been losing that advantage. That the Dallas area has been growing more expensive relative to other metropolitan areas around the United States ever since 2012. The city of Dallas has been fortunate. It's had some degree of population growth, unlike a lot of other cities, but the housing supply has most definitely not kept up. The city of Dallas performs kind of average among big cities in terms of like new housing permits. We're sort of average performance in terms of building new units, but above average in population growth. That means demand is outstripping supply. It means prices are going up. We score about average by the standards of big cities in terms of the share of the population that is housing cost burdened by various measures. But I would argue that we are deteriorating on that measure, and we're also deteriorating on home ownership, where we actually are a below average performer. As for our actual policies, like I said, I do want to take a hat off and look at I'm always an optimistic guy. I want to look at the glasses half full, and I do think we've had a tremendous amount of positive energy the last couple of years. So I compliment Councilman West, his colleagues, and some really brilliant staff in the city who've been tackling this in recent years. But I do want to say we have a whole lot of work to do. One of our great assets is that we have an enormous amount of unused or underused land in the city. But I would argue that we still have a lot of work to do in figuring out how to actually put that to productive use in creating housing of all types, including of the subsidized affordable variety. I would suggest that we have some great policies that have very recently been passed, as Councilman West said. We have, for example, a really well thought through policy to attract private capital to build mixed income housing, set aside a certain number of units and get a density bonus. That's, as Councilman West is producing pretty good results. And we also have a new community land trust policy on the books, which is hopefully just on the verge of actually going into motion, which also could be a force for good. So to sum up, Ms. Robinson, and I see you're back, so I've kind of used my time. What I want to say is it's really hard. It's complex. Policymakers are swimming against the tide of a whole lot of competition for land and capital. They're making forward progress, and yet in some sense, despite that, we're slipping backwards. So I would argue that our city, our state, our nation needs a massive step up in its focus on housing affordability, affordable housing, and tackling this whole vast challenge in order to create more opportunity in our society.
Thank you, Dr. Cullum Clark. If you all, were listening and catching all of those nuggets, it was just powerful how you laid it out for us. We really appreciate that. I shared in the chat the article link to your Promoting Inclusive Urban Growth, a call to action. So you have a lot of great information in that article. Anything similar to what I asked Councilmember Chad West, anything that individuals attending today can be advocating for at the local, state, federal level? Is it just writing your representative and telling them, affordable housing is necessary? What would you say that needs to happen?
Well, I again, I'm always an optimist, always glass half full. Look, we'll all watch closely what the new administration is going to do. I think there will be a new push that will be useful. But in terms of what the citizen in our city can do, here's what I would suggest to you. I believe that even though we're chipping away at it, that our city government, the policies left over from the past create too many obstacles to creating new housing supply of all kinds, and too many obstacles to creating new affordable housing supply. I have a guy I talk to all the time who is a senior executive with a LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit developer. They do that full-time for a living. They say the city of Dallas is still way too difficult a place to do business. The suburban cities are vastly better, so they're hardly building anything at all in the city of Dallas. That's a tragedy. So what I also think that while our comprehensive housing policy, count me as a fan, that said, I do think that we have overly tied ourselves up in knots about where in the city we would build new housing. I totally get the basic idea of, for example, the so-called market value analysis, that we're not going to use scarce resources to concentrate poverty to build, new affordable housing in highly remote locations, far from job centers, with only low-income people living nearby. I get it. That's philosophically the right thing. But if you go too far in the other direction and you say we'll only allow new subsidized housing to come into being in places where the conditions are like perfect, the stars have aligned just spectacularly, what is the result? You'll build nothing. So what I would say to the ordinary citizen is call their council person, go to meetings, and say, we got a 5-alarm fire here. We've got a major crisis. We can't be too cute about exactly where we build. We can't be too rigid in the restrictions that we put on like light tech developers and so forth. We've got to actually say creating lots more units is priority number one. Some other things are probably priority number two. So I really want to salute Councilman West and the council for the 1,000 affordable unit challenge. Let's make it a several thousand challenge. And I hope just ordinary citizens will tell their council people, we've got to get way better at this, way more aggressive.
Really appreciate that. That's powerful and very succinct action that folks can take. Thank you, Dr. Clark, for joining us today on this panel. You all, there's a plethora of information out there on the website for the SMU economic growth school, and all that information that's out there that you can take a look at some of the other things that Dr. Clark has been working on in that space. So thank you for joining us. We're going to move right along. I'm excited. There's plenty of chat happening in the chat box. Again, you can take a look at the materials. We'll be posting them afterwards on the Dallas Area Habitat website. So if you missed it, if you missed a link or a presentation, we'll have it afterwards. We're even recording the summit. Again, if you're just joining or coming in a little late, my name is Jolie Angel Robinson. I am your guide through this virtual galaxy today. I am a Trekkie at heart, so you're hearing some of that lingo. I'm the VP of Government Affairs and Public Policy here at Dallas Area Habitat. I'm going to move right along. I'm taking a pulse of the time and everything. To our second panel, we have a tremendous panel of experts that really kind of do direct service, if you want to break it down like that. We have President and CEO, Builders of Hope, Mr. James Armstrong. You'll hear from him first. Then you'll hear from Jennifer Rangel. I had a chance to meet her through an op-ed fellowship, tremendous work with the Inclusive Communities Project, really, really great at breaking down the zoning question and conversation, especially with a lens towards providing bilingual information. And then Dr. Miriam, Vice President, Policy Development and Research with DHA. She'll close out that second panel. So Mr. James Armstrong, before I get started, I'll be posting, I had an opportunity to work with the UNT Law Group. I'll be posting some of the tremendous work and data that they did around affordable housing to our website as well, just talking about how vast the problem is with being able to provide affordable housing. They also have some different models across the country. And again, you'll be able to take a look at that presentation on our website following this summit. So Mr. James Armstrong, thank you for joining us this morning. I'll let you go ahead and take it away. After you take yourself off mute, then you can go ahead and.
It's a common mistake. Coming behind the economist got me a little nervous. No, good morning, everyone. And I want to thank the team, the exceptional team at Habitat, Mr. Dave Crawford and Jolie for this invitation. A lot of wonderful things have already been discussed. And my goal really in the short time is to attempt to try to tie the statistics that we've already heard with the actual production, on the ground production. How do those tie together, and what are some of the roadblocks that we see in actually doing the sticks and bricks of affordable housing? At this time, I'm going to share my screen. Give me one moment. All right. All right. Here we go. Okay. Let's see from the beginning. All right. So again, Builders of Hope, our motto, building hope, building home ownership. Just a little bit about Builders of Hope. We were founded in 1998 and with an aim to revitalize West Dallas. Started off with a program called Program Reach, which essentially took men who had previous convictions, records with criminal records or petty records, and we trained them on construction. And started out with renovations and then led into the development of single family homes. Over the course of our 20-year history, we've built over 500 homes, a mix between subdivision build outs and infill development. We just don't rely on infill development to bring about affordable housing in our city. We believe that it takes nonprofit players such as Builders of Hope, such as Habitat, operating similar to for-profit developers. So building out subdivisions, partnering with great developers like Victor Toledo and Greenleaf Ventures, who specializes in infill development or specializes in infrastructure development, and partnering with them and then bringing a level of affordability to their development. And so that's another strategy that we use here at BOH. We are a certified community housing development organization with the city, which means that we receive federal dollars to promote and produce affordable housing. We are also the only organization certified with Dallas County. So our service area goes beyond the city of Dallas and it reaches to other cities in the Dallas County map. Our targeted areas are West Dallas, Pleasant Grove, South Dallas, and the Southern Dallas region. We've built over 75 million in single family real estate value. We've created almost 25 million in community wealth, which we'll get to here in a bit. We've secured over 45 million in government subsidies and grants and created over 1,500 construction jobs. Our vision really is to be a leader in the nonprofit community development space by providing innovative models for building thriving communities that promote economic mobility. And you've heard that before, right? The other two presenters mentioned this term called economic mobility. I'm going to tell you how BOH uses that term in our strategy, where we build, how we build, at what price, because we really start with that. And you see it again in our mission. Our mission is really to transform Dallas by increasing economic mobility through real estate and building strong, safe, connected communities. It's not enough just to put a roof over someone's head. I think you're missing the picture if you just stop there. But as many of us know, we live in a city that has a wealth disparity problem. And so I think it's prudent for home builders to look at production in a way that most private builders look at it. How can we bring strength to the market? How can we increase economic mobility through real estate? So kind of our strategy, how we work, right? If our goal is equitable community development, and when I say equitable community development, that is community development that involves the community development that focuses on the needs of the community rather than what the market would allow, and community development that is equitable, meaning we're not just concentrating poverty. I've said that for far too long, affordable housing projects have kept poor people poor. And you can see that trend in Dallas, where we've placed affordable housing in one corner of the city, and all we've done is concentrate poverty. So that term equitable community development is extremely important because it has a lot of variables to it. It's not just building what the market allows. It's not just putting something that we can get the biggest bang for our buck, but how do we actually solve some of our biggest crises in our city through real estate? So we use two strategies: community investments and community involvement. Community investments includes attaining mixed income housing production, small business development, job training, mixed use, retail development. It also includes partnering with partners like Wells Fargo, Dora Zabatha with Wells Fargo, who is a advocate of affordable housing. It also includes partnering with some of the foundations, right? The Muse Family Foundation, some of these big foundations that have the capital that most of the smaller nonprofit developers need. And then we tie community involvement. We believe at BOH that community involvement is the bedrock for community development. To do community development without community involvement is really, doing not only yourself a disservice, but you're doing the community a disservice. So we are involved with neighborhood planning, working on a West Dallas-wide community development plan. I believe in Dallas that every community, every neighborhood should have a community plan so that when developers come to the table, the city can look at that plan and see if it aligns with the neighborhood needs, wants, and desires. We're also very involved in community engagement, advocacy, and education. I'm moving really quick. So I want to talk just opportunities of growth real quick. Opportunities of growth. And most of these have already been discussed. So I'm not going to go into detail. We know that Dallas has a wealth gap, right? It continues to widen. We know 6 out of 10 families in Dallas are housing cost burden. That statistic we know. We know that it's projected by 2045 that 40% of households in Dallas will experience one or more housing problems. We know that there's a limited supply for families below 80% of the AMI. I think Metro Tech's last projection said that housing below the 200 mark, there's only 1 to 2 months worth of inventory. So that means that families who make less, not only do they have less choice to choose from, but more than likely they are limited to a particular area. And so the things that I see on the ground level as an affordable housing builder, how do we solve some of these most alarming statistics? Number one, there has to be an increase in access to capital to promote production. Dr. Cullum said it beautifully. We know that capital is very attracted to bigger projects, typically in the suburban areas of Dallas. But greater Southern Dallas Progress has really pushed for more CRA money to go to the southern sector. When it comes to actually building and producing affordable housing, the capital has to be equitable. And we talk about equitable housing, we talk about equitable education, but very rarely do we talk about equity when it comes to capital disbursement. And that is a great need. We have to get more capital so that smaller builders like BOH and some of the other CDCs can produce. And really, that's the thing that separates the big builders from the small builders. It's not the ability to do it. It's really the ability as it relates to the capital. And so we have to encourage our banks to look at how they lend money. We also have to look at different ways of financing, right? So we have a West Dallas project where we're building about 20 affordable homes. That one project has 6 different sources of capital. And so it takes multiple stacks of capital to get these things done, especially in the southern region. Not only do we have to increase access to capital to promote production, but we also have to increase capacity to produce production. It is so very important that the city not only deal with the high level policy, but we also deal with what are ways that we can build the capacity of local home builders, local community development organizations, so that they can take their operation from building 1 home, 2 homes to 20 homes. And that's something that we really haven't figured out yet. BOH in the past, we've built 5, 10 homes. This year, we are set to build 35 homes. So you see a huge increase in our capacity, but that took a lot of partnership. It took a lot of strategy, and it took a lot of really just grunt work. So last, I want to just talk about this idea of wealth creation through real estate. So here you have a layout of past projects and future projects, the number of homes, the price per square feet, the current value, and then the wealth that was created through that housing production. And we see here a total of $23 million, almost $24 million going into the pockets or the net worth of families that are typically below 80% of AMI. So we know that that is very important. And so we have to understand that as nonprofit builders, as thought leaders, let's not prick against the market. How can we use the market to solve some of our most daunting statistics? How can we use this market, the free market, capitalism, to benefit those families that make below 80% of AMI? Real quick, I want to mention this because I think it's very important. But currently, and one of the issues with the housing policy, although I am a huge advocate of it, and Dr. Cullum touched on this, we have to begin to align the housing market with the labor market, right? So the Dallas Metro average area average annual income or annual wage, 53,000, is probably a little bit more. That was a 2018 number. But if you look at the top, where are jobs headed, right? What in 2026, where will these jobs head? We have to start looking at housing production from not only solving the current crisis, but how do we look at housing production from a futuristic standpoint? And if we look at the wages that are projected to see some form of growth in the next couple of years, we will see at the top registered nurses, waiters, and waitresses, $24,000. So we really have to create avenues where families and individuals that are, making $15 an hour can afford to live in the city center. This is a map that shows kind of where those jobs are, right? So, and the whole point of this map is to really show that there is opportunity in the southern region. So you have red that represents hotspot for low wage jobs, and then the kind of yellow, you have the hotspot that households below the poverty level. And so this map really shows that there is a disparity between where poor people live and where they work. That gives us an opportunity, right? That gives us an opportunity to number one, seek to attract employers to go where poor people are or where low-income families are. But also it gives us an opportunity to say, okay, how can we not only concentrate on the southern region, but how can we move housing production and be strategic about placing housing near the southern region? Last point. So our last point, and this is kind of our model for strategic community development. And I've shared this model a couple of times because I think it's so important. And I promise you the houses that we build look better than the stick house. At the base, what we need is partnerships. A lot of times we rush and we make policy about production. We focus on production, but the partnerships are not there. And I would say the walls to build the house is people-focused programming. It doesn't make sense to go out and build 500 homes when we know that people in Southern Dallas are not at that. They have credit issues, they don't make the wages. And so there is an order to this thing. If we want to see the production, we have to secure those partnerships, meaning it's not just the city's job to provide affordable housing. Everyone has a part to play. And lastly, I'll say this, I use this scenario. If, Jolie and I were to go out on Hampton and try to pull a car, I would probably break my back and we would both be in the hospital. But if you had Jolie, Habitat, Builders of Hope, Chad West, the housing director, the Reese Jones Foundation, Muse Family Foundation, the banks, if we all pulled the car, we could move it, and we could move it a lot quicker. And so that's my PowerPoint. If we have any questions, I'll stop sharing, but I'll be open for questions at this time.
Thank you, James. That was powerful. I really have, you covered quite a bit, and I really have, because I know a little bit about your story, I really have a personal, why is this a passion of yours? Like personally, the work that you do with Builders of Hope, the work that you do, how passionately you speak about affordable housing. If you could give us just a little bit of a description of why you're passionate about this work.
Very important. I grew up in West Dallas. I grew up in the projects of West Dallas, in Topiac Apartments. The first night we slept on a twin mattress. My mom and my sister and I slept on a twin mattress in an empty apartment. And we actually had to live in a homeless shelter for 2 weeks in order to get on the DHA housing list. And I really didn't see our life change until my mom was able to go to school, get an education, and then purchase a house. And so I know firsthand how housing, number one, it stabilizes a family, but also two, it opens up an entirely different world. Now my mom, who was a single mother struggling in West Dallas, is working on her PhD in childhood education. My sister is a DISD teacher. And so I believe that success story is everyone's. Everyone has a right to that success story, but we have to get this housing thing, and not just for individuals in the 150, 120% of AMI. We have to get this housing thing right for families who are barely making ends meet, because I believe housing is a human right.
Very well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your time with us this morning to share a little bit about Builders of Hope and your personal attachment to why it's so important to focus on affordable housing here in the city of Dallas. Really appreciate you. Moving right along to our next panelist, Jennifer Rangel, Planning and Community Outreach Director with Inclusive Communities Project. She's going to focus on neighborhood equity, talking about neighborhood-led planning. The concept itself is phenomenal. I wanted to have her join our panel this morning to talk a little bit more about that. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am very excited to be here, inspired, and taking in everything, all the nuggets like Jolie explained. But first of all, thank you, Habitat for Humanity, for inviting ICP to be a part of this discussion and this phenomenal summit. I will share my screen because I also have a presentation. Full disclosure, someone is working right outside my window. So if you hear a lot of noise and you can't hear me, wave or put it in the chat. Just let me know, because I definitely want to make sure everyone hears what I am saying. So give me 1 second. So as Jolie explained, my segment is focused on neighborhood equity and how neighborhood-led plans could be used as an advocacy tool. And you've heard about neighborhood plans throughout today, and I'll dive into those details at this time. Just a quick roadmap about my segment. I'll start sharing about ICP's mission and dive right in and make the connection between equity and neighborhood-led planning. Who is ICP? ICP is the Inclusive Communities Project. We are an affordable fair housing nonprofit, and we have a three-part mission. We work towards the creation and maintenance of thriving, racially and economically inclusive communities. We work towards the expansion of fair and affordable housing opportunities for low-income families. And we work to redress for policies and practices that perpetuate the harmful effects of discrimination and segregation. And so we approach our work within two frames of neighborhood equity and options. Neighborhood equity, meaning we work to facilitate equity in historically redlined and underserved neighborhoods. Options, we work to ensure that housing voucher renters are able to access low-income housing outside the inequitably racially isolated neighborhoods. So now you have a sense of what we mean, what I mean about neighborhood equity. Let's unpack the word equity as we throw it around today. Equity means that every person has the resources and services they need to thrive, no matter their background. Equity also means that we are reducing disparities while improving outcomes for everyone. And now when we talk about racial equity, that happens when people are thriving and race cannot be used to predict outcomes. Equity and equality are two different things because equity accounts for people's unique identities, circumstances, and histories, as well as their different experiences with systems and institutions. Neighborhood equity is a fight that everyone can join. Just like in 2018, when several Habitat for Humanity Joppy residents advocated about what they wanted or did not want to see in their neighborhood. In this case, it was a zoning request for 2 concrete batch plants. And so these homeowners advocated and raised their voice about their vision for their community. Now, this is the big picture. Neighborhood equity is important because people's housing experiences have and are negatively impacted by public and private processes and decisions. When we talk about harms of the past, the words on the slides are some of the examples that resurfaced during those discussions. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend checking out a book called The Color of Law. That book by Richard Rothstein focuses on how the government segregated the country. And also check out the Segregated by Design short film, which is based off of the book. Those resources are very helpful because it provides historical context of many of the challenges that we are continue to address and face today. But now I will get a little bit more specific. First, we will talk about opportunity. And the Child Opportunity Index, which was created by Diversity Data Kids, uses several data sets focused on education, health and environment, and social and economic indicators. When you look at the Dallas-Fort Worth Arlington Metroplex with this graph, you can see how Black and Hispanic children are highly concentrated in very low and low opportunity neighborhoods. So purple indicating Hispanic and yellow indicating Black. And here we have very low. It's hard to see, but you'll have the slides with you for future reference. You see that primarily there's a high increase of percentage when you look at the very low and low opportunity neighborhoods. And then the opposite is true when looking at high or very high opportunity neighborhoods. You see that that percentage decreases, but at the same time, the inverse happens of you have more white and Asian Pacific Islander children living in high and very high opportunity neighborhoods. And the question here for all of us is, how can we have opportunity in every neighborhood? But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, how can people access these neighborhoods that may have been, in many cases, a historically off-limit area? Now I will do another pivot. This is based off a recent study from Paul Quinn College, led by the Urban Research Initiative Fellow Evelyn Mayo and her students. They analyzed and mapped air pollution in the city of Dallas, and they noticed that some neighborhoods had higher concentrations of heavy air polluters. And they outlined Joppy was one of those neighborhoods, West Dallas, Floral Farms. And what's very neat about this research is that it not only spoke about the inequities on the ground as it relates to air pollution, but it also provided policy recommendations. How do we reduce the air pollution burden? How do we minimize air pollution, and et cetera? So definitely, I recommend you all to check it out. Now on zoning and land use, it's something we today have spoken about in previous segments. Last year, the Daniel and Bishara law firm released their findings on industrial zoning in residential areas of Dallas. And they found overwhelmingly that in the city of Dallas single-family zoning districts in Black and Latinx neighborhoods are located, for the most part, located next to heavy industrial zoning districts, right? That is very concerning. And I am glad the city is looking at land use because it's definitely something we need to address. We need to address the racial zoning inequities in the city of Dallas. Now let's bring it home, right? What's going on in the world right now? Some of you may have read the Dallas Morning News article that was recently published about how Fair Park was chosen in South Dallas as a mega site to distribute the COVID-19 vaccine. And this might be the tweet heard around the world at this point, but it is highlighted in the article because it displays a map that shows the vaccination sites, right? A very alarming map. And what's also shared in the article are several concerns. One of them being how communities of color often lack the access to clinics, pharmacies, and other places allowed to administer the vaccines. And so without a doubt, we need to increase essential resources and services in neighborhoods. But I would also like to point out is that if you weren't aware, the CDC has great data on the social vulnerability index, which basically tells us the level of resilience of communities in a sense of the ability to survive and thrive in times in such as a pandemic. This data is essential to help communities. You might be wondering, why am I talking about public health, land use, and listing all these other topics on the screen at an affordable housing summit? And that's because from public health to land use, there is an assortment of inequities on the ground. And as we talk about low-income housing, it should be in tandem to these other factors in order to provide context and to help make informed decisions. Neighborhood-led plans can sometimes be referred to as comprehensive area plans. And as the city defines it, those plans are adopted by the city council to establish land use and development policy in specific areas. And they are intended to guide future zoning and land development decisions. So breaking that down, in other words, it is a document that should and will have to incorporate a community's vision and priorities, such as, for example, what you see on the screen. That way you can have an idea of what we're all working towards to, right? As a resident, what is your ideal neighborhood? And so I also would like to point out that neighborhood-led plans, although yes, they could, really tackle a lot of the issues, it is not the only tool and not the only solution, right? There's a lot more at play, but it is a very much so viable start to start dismantling many of the challenges communities are facing and have been facing. And if it is done in an inclusive manner, it will include the voice of people of all ages and backgrounds. And I also want to stretch on ages because these plans look into the future, right? It's not just talking about today. And so we need to make sure that we are including the youth, our children, because they will grow up, right? And their voice matters, right? It's their community as well. And backgrounds as well, as Jolie explained, and I'll dive into later, the bilingual or accessibility is also very much so important to ensure that everyone's voice is included. And this is a really good resource published by the American Planning Association. And it talks about when we're discussing equity as it relates to urban planning, what do we mean? And in this guide, it does point out that planning for equity doesn't stop growth or serve as an impediment to development, but instead planning for equity is creating and extending opportunities to each member of the community. It is recognizing and helping build the capacity of each member of the community. It is acknowledging and taking action when there are inequities present. And it also is an opportunity to adopt new approaches to planning that fully embrace equity. And so we must ask ourselves, what policies, what practices continue to drive today's inequities, and how in our professional and personal life help create solutions. Bottom line, we have to meet people where they are. Context matters when addressing racial disparities because every community is different. Here are two neighborhoods that, for example, do not have essential neighborhood services, such as a pharmacy, but they are still uniquely different because one lives next door to an industrial activity and the other has experienced demolitions of their historic houses. But I also would like to highlight that these are residents, these are leaders in the neighborhood equity advocacy work because they are being proactive, right? As I said, a neighborhood plan kind of lays out, and as James also explained, you kind of setting the tone, the standards, like what you would like to see in your community. And so they are being proactive and both are working on their own neighborhood-led plan. And for Floral Farms, there is a draft. So that I do have on this presentation a list of resources. And if you're curious, you could check that out, what the draft looks like. And I also would like to point out that once it reaches to a point where it would be adopted at the city level, it would be the first bilingual plan in the history of the city of Dallas. And it's just check it out. It's a really good and very inspiring document. So we have to be realistic as well about urban planning tools and how they have been historically used to segregate and discriminate. But now they should also instead be used to create fair and inclusive communities where everyone can thrive. Neighborhood-led plans, as you heard from James as well, should be grassroots, meaning that a process driven by the community. And at the end of the day, residents are also experts because they understand firsthand the challenges and have their own personal lived experiences. And so it's a matter of sharing the tools available for them. And as we work to improve neighborhoods and help people access historically off-limit neighborhoods, it's going to take all of us within our own respective professional or as residents. It takes it's a huge endeavor as we've been speaking on this conversation of affordable housing. But the matter of fact is communities of color continue to carry the weight of the harms of the past, and the time is up. It's time for accountability. And so these are the resources I mentioned. I would provide, feel free to check them out. And I also have my contact information and ICP's social media handles in case you would like to stay up to date with our advocacy efforts and yeah, and policy interest. So with that, thank you all so much.
Jennifer, thank you. I always love to hear you talk about this and talk about the work that you do. You really exude the passion that you have for it. So appreciate that. One of the things I kind of follow you from the outside, but you were given kudos for creating a bilingual animated video. Can you give us briefly, why was that important? And that video was about informing residents about zoning. So why was that video important and why specifically about zoning?
Being aware of the zoning you are surrounded by is important because it impacts your entire life, from the quality of air you breathe to the options of affordable housing and housing options you see in your community. It touches all of that. And the big picture, zoning tells you what is or is not allowed. Why? Because zoning, think about zoning as a set of rules. That's what basically they are. But these rules, you can also think about them as a set of values, right? Because you, as the zoning rule is saying, I want X, Y, and Z. So you're placing value in X, Y, and Z. And so you need to be very much so aware about the zonings you're surrounded by, but also look at the big picture in the sense of if you're looking at your neighborhood and you see a church, right? Well, In the city of Dallas, every property has a zoning district. And so find out what that zoning district is, because today that place might be a church, but tomorrow it might be something completely different. So it's just really important to be aware about those, like they say, the devil in the detail type thing. And also to be realistic is that along the same lines, zoning has been used to separate uses like industrial, residential. But when you look at the history of zoning, historically, it has divided people. It has divided people by race and ethnicity. And so, and you look at the history, you see that oftentimes communities of color were zoned next to industrial activity. So that in a nutshell, but as Jolie said, I linked it on the presentation. There are a set of videos. We worked with Caramia and Soul Rep Theater, who lended their awesome talents to do the voiceover. Not me. You will not hear me.
Well, thank you. Yes, to Jennifer's point, I put the Color of Law link in the chat. It really goes into zoning and how historically zoning has been used as an oppressive tool to continue to segregate people here throughout our country. The same with, as she mentioned, the industrial plant next to a predominantly African-American community that didn't happen by chance, but was a result of some of the zoning laws historically throughout our country. So take a look at that. Jennifer, thank you for your presentation and for joining us this morning. Absolutely, absolutely vital and important. Next up, we have Dr. Miriam, Vice President, Policy Development and Research with DHA. I wanted to include DHA in this conversation. Some people conflate vouchers with affordable housing or all of the above, right? It's really can be a confusing topic if you're not speaking this lingo and language every day. I had a chance several years back to hear from Dr. Miriam about the North Texas Housing Assessment and about transportation and housing. And so I wanted to ensure to invite her today and hear from her. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead, Dr. Miriam.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I am so grateful to be sharing the virtual stage with such bright minds. And of course, I'm a big fan of Dallas Habitat for Humanity. So this is my second panel with you guys. So I'm really excited about sharing some content about the work that we're doing at DHA. So I'm going to switch screen and share my quick presentation. Here we go. Let's see if this is going to work. Let's do this. So many screens. And let's do, struggling here a little bit. I have to switch this.
Take your time. This virtual world, this galaxy we're in this virtual world.
Yeah, and I have 3 screens. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to share this screen here. Here we go. Is this working?
Perfect.
Okay, very well. So as I said, I am the Vice President of Policy Development and Research at the Dallas Housing Authority. And today on the agenda, we will talk about, who we are, the fair housing patterns in North Texas, data and research, and what could be some, potential supportive policies to move forward with that agenda. And because I'm looking at that screen, if that's okay, I'm just going to turn off my camera because this is a little weird. Let's see if I can do that. Here we go. So I can look at my 3rd screen. So in a nutshell, we are the Dallas Housing Authority, and we are federally sponsored by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And as Jolie has mentioned, we often get confused with the city of Dallas or some of the corporations that are doing affordable housing. And so no, we are a governmental entity, and what we do is administering 2 major federal housing programs. The first one is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, where we serve approximately 17,000 families. And the way it works, families are provided with a voucher and are able to lease in the private market. For the public housing program, we own and operate about 3,200 units, and we act as a landlord for these units. And these units are located within the city of Dallas, but I think it's worth noting that we have a 7-county jurisdiction. So we cover the Denton, Collin, Tarrant, Dallas, Rockwall, Kaufman, and Ellis County. So a very large jurisdiction for a housing authority that operates some of the largest programs in the country with all the complexities that comes with it. So this is who we are. And so Julie asked me to do, a quick flashback to the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment that I had the chance to lead back in 2016 all the way to 2018. And so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the exercise was about, what we have found, and how this is informing some of the work that we are currently doing at the Dallas Housing Authority. So flashback, I used to work in academia, and so I had the chance to be one of the principal investigators behind the assessment of fair housing. And so the assessment of fair housing was a data-driven planning process established by the US Department of Housing and Urban Development pursuant to the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. So the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, or the AFFH rule, required HUD funding recipients, so housing authorities, cities, and counties, and states receiving funding to conduct an assessment of fair housing. That is to say, to look at data and see what are the patterns of segregation historically and today. What do we see in terms of access to opportunities, transportation, proficient schools, you name it, it was in there. And so when I was part of the UT Arlington research group, I had the chance to lead this largest consortium in the country, which included the city of Dallas, Dallas Housing Authorities, and Frisco, Tarrant County, you name it, all in there. And so what we have found is probably nothing surprising for this audience, and because the previous panelists have mentioned it, we have a very stark geography of inequity in Dallas, and we have persisting inequities along racial and economic lines. And one really, baffling metric that we have found is that racial segregation is actually increasing and worsening since the 90s, which may sound counterintuitive given the fact that we had a multitude of regulations and laws enacted since the 60s, but yet very little progress has been made. Another key finding of the North Texas housing assessment is that we have found a recurrent geographical mismatch between where funding and targeted effort in redevelopment and revitalizations are made and where impoverished and segregated neighborhoods are. So again, this geographical mismatch where we invest doesn't really match the neediest and most vulnerable neighborhood was a key finding for us. All right, so now, how do we address these challenges, right? So the previous panelists have mentioned, and I think, we are aligned here that we have inequities, social injustice, challenges, but how do we do it? There is no blueprints, no roadmap on how to address this, and we have to be really realistic that it's complex operationally to address segregation, how can I say I guess fair housing issues altogether. So the regulatory constraint, the scarcity of resources, how do we do it? Oops, I went too far. Oh, go back. Here we go. So I want to talk a bit more about data and research, and I wanted to pick a topic that is, I said, current right now and pressing, which is the COVID-19 housing crisis. We know that the COVID-19 impacts are multiple. So we have eviction, unemployment, loss of income, just the disruption of access to services, of course, health issues, death, and insecurities in terms of food and as well as medicine. So really the city of Dallas and other cities around the country were tasked with, providing rental assistance. And so how do we pursue equity, knowing what we know of the fair housing landscape in Dallas, and how do we build stronger, healthier communities? These are some of the core questions that we had. And so the city of Dallas has committed about $10 million towards housing assistance for COVID impacted residents. And they have found, and I really commend the city of Dallas for being reflective throughout the process, because this is such a complicated undertaking, so they have looked at their initial efforts and have found that it was difficult for them to reach impoverished neighborhoods. And so they looked for partners with proximity to vulnerable population to distribute the funding. And DHA, we threw our hat in the ring to help be part of the solution, and we received $4.5 million to disseminate to COVID impacted Dallas residents. So what did we do? So, giving my history as a researcher, understanding what are some of the fair housing issues that are pervasive and persisting in North Texas, I wanted to design operation that take into account this variation in neighborhood inequity and vulnerability. And so we drastically move from the conventional model, which is first come, first serve, fill out that application, here's some funding for you. And so we move from what we call this disparity agnostic model and took into account some very important elements. The first one is that we have chronically under-resourced communities in Dallas. And so because our job was to provide resources, we wanted to make sure that we took into account these factors. The second one is that COVID-19 has really deepened the digital divide and tech disparities among Dallas residents. So we also wanted to account for that. We also wanted to understand critically how the current status quo further inequities, right? Is the way we're doing business, the way we're doing our job, really furthering some of these inequities? So we put some thoughts behind it. And of course, the operational complexity is this is a huge lift. To be able to push millions of dollars as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible out the door is a really complex task. So what we've done first to account for chronically under-resourced communities or that geography of inequity is that we use the CDC index of social vulnerability, which we have modified to fit the local context. And so what we've done is to, upon understanding the social vulnerability of neighborhoods in Dallas, we have divided the $4 million that we had at the district level. And so depending on the number of families living in highly vulnerable neighborhoods, we have allocated funding at the district level. So for example, the most vulnerable districts would have the most money. And really this was a process for us to make sure that money was set aside for neighborhoods that were chronically left behind. And so that was really a way for us to protect resources from being eaten by the first come, first serve residents. The other thing too is that we have made our process mobile friendly, multilingual. And so folks could submit documentation using their cell phone, taking pictures, and we have translated the application and marketing documentation to make sure that the information is actually received by Dallas residents. And as I mentioned, we really moved away from the first come, first serve policy, which is likely to favor those who have access to the information and have access to the technology. And so what we have done instead is to institute successive lotteries. So folks who are able to go through the pipeline of providing, the documentation needed from both the resident side as well as the landlord side, we have then conducted lotteries to randomly select folks to receive assistance. And of course, because we're looking at pushing over $4 million in less than 3 months, we had to invest in technology. And so luckily DHA has been doing some investment in the realm of high tech, advanced data and AI. And so we used our CRM platform to automate, triage, and prioritize applications. And I'm going to dive a little bit more into this. And so what we have done is to develop an automated workflow that will review and prioritize applications. So staff only review applications that we know are complete. And so this was, one of the complexity that I have mentioned earlier, is we want to do this right. And to do this right, you have to write the right kind of operation to make sure that you avoid the bottlenecks and nobody gets the money. We also included an extension that enabled us to automatically geocode applications, which mean that when an application was received from us, we were able to tell exactly if that application was in District 1 or District 6, for example. And of course, we had live tracking. And so I'm going to go very quickly through the process that we have designed to provide COVID-19 rental assistance. And so the first thing that we've done is to make this application available on our website. So folks could, answer some very basic questions such as, do you live within the city of Dallas? What's your income? Upload your social security card, upload a copy or a picture of your driver's license and so forth. And so what we've done is to really design the whole process and write quite a few algorithms, probably 50 or so. And what the computer does, if you will, or the system, is to first create a profile for each applicant and to then make a determination as of, is the family pre-eligible? Meaning, do they meet the income eligibility threshold? Do they live within the city of Dallas? Are they COVID-19 impacted? And are all the files uploaded? And so upon making that determination, the system really triaged the application in 3 different buckets. The first one is, looks good, it appears that the application is complete and the family is eligible. The second one is, it looks like the family is eligible based on income information, lives in Dallas, but I don't see a driver's license uploaded or a lease uploaded. And thirdly, it appears that the family is ineligible, so they receive automatically a notification by email and by text that unfortunately they do not meet the criteria to receive housing assistance. And the really cool thing with that system is that you're able to prioritize this really, really high volume of application that we receive for staff to only review manually those that we know are pre-eligible and have all the documentation uploaded. Rest assured that for those who did not have all the documentation, we had automatic reminders, emails, and texts letting know the applicant that we're still missing either a copy of the Social Security card or a copy of the lease. And so that was a way for us to really gain operational efficiency to make sure that we're not spending our limited staff on making phone calls or sending manual emails, but that the computer will take care of this on a very large scale basis, thousands and thousands of applications. And upon going through the manual review, if everything checks out, it goes to the landlord. And so the landlord then receives a link to upload the W-9 and tell us how much money the tenant owes. And we continue then the process. If the application meets all criteria from both the tenant and the landlord side, then applications are channeled within their respective district funding pool. Because if you remember, we received $4 million that we have equitably divided across district depending on their need using our modified CDC SVI index. And so upon the application going to each district pool, we conducted a randomization, which enabled us to then select applicants and to provide funding. And so this is, in a nutshell, how the system was designed with multiple design elements to make sure that the system was equitable. What we have done is to develop a tracking dashboard, which enabled me to really track where funding was coming, but also where it was not coming. Because the analysis was conducted both at the census tract level or neighborhood level, if you will, as well as zip code level, we were able to track where applications were coming and where they were not coming, and accordingly tailor our affirmative marketing strategies to make sure that zip code 75217 is appropriately outreach to, and the residents are aware of the opportunity to apply for funding. The other part is to be able to just read the data geographically. And so we had a map, and all the data was, of course, geolocated, as I said. And I can see Jolie is back, so I'm going to try to move quickly. I have 2 more slides. And we talk about supportive policy. That was my third topic for today. And surprise, I don't have really anything that hasn't been talked about before. There is a great website, which is called Local Housing Solutions, which was put together by the NYU Furman Center, as well as Apt Associates. And it has a huge laundry list of policies. So I would invite you to go ahead and visit that website. But as it pertains to DHA's operation, I think some really important policies that would enable us to move the needle forward in combating segregation and really fostering upward mobility for the families that we serve would be source of income protection, the development of location-sensitive policies and programming, of course, inclusionary zoning, which I know Councilmember West is a firm proponent of. And we are also pursuing a moving to work designation, which will enable us to change the way voucher holders pay their rent, which is today tied to their income, which means if their income goes up, then they are being taxed on that progress, which I think is a poverty trap policy-wise. And moving forward, THU will continue the development of innovative model. We are in partnership with Harvard University, where we will be creating a second generation of CMTO, which is creating moves to opportunity for voucher holders. And last slide, programmatically, what can we do? We need intentionality. I will invite, my colleagues and partners in the field of doing in housing to leverage data and technology, to rely on partnership, and to dedicate resources where needed, which I think we need to put the funding behind housing focused initiative, develop the human capital necessary to use data and technology, and to set really clear expectations for ourselves. And that is my last slide. And I'm so sorry I had to work on so many different.
No, perfect presentation. Thank you. A couple of questions that were in the chat that perhaps you can speak to. Councilman Casey Thomas asked, do you support landlords being able to apply for this funding?
Yes. So what we have done is to create a two-head pipeline. So tenants could start the application as well as landlord. And we have found that when landlords start the application, the process is really, really quick. So that's one of the big lessons that we've been sharing with multiple steering committees interested in the second round of COVID-19 funding to really invest in having landlords to first apply. Because one of the operational bottlenecks that we have seen despite the use of technology, AI, and advanced analytics is that tenants don't have all the documentation needed to move to the next stage, but often the landlord has that information. So if you start with a landlord, you're going to have a full lease, you're going to have the full information on the outstanding balance, which will enable you to avoid that operational bottleneck. And again, I've seen a lot of things in the press around the difficulties and the challenges that the city have had in dispersing COVID-19 funding. And I have to say, it is a very, very difficult task because you have, regulations that you have to follow, and you have to absorb and treat thousands and thousands of applications. And so really, I commend the city of Dallas for first, taking the lead on this, to also enable partners to be part of the solution and trusting us with our equity focused models to be part of the solution. So
And the other question came from Ms. Dora Zapata, a wonderful champion and advocate and partner around this affordable housing conversation. Do you know if this application is unique to DHA? Do you know if other housing authorities are kind of using that process you referred to, or groups administering rental assistance are offering similar models?
Unfortunately not. This is something that we have quote unquote made up. Just really using the lessons of the city of Dallas and understanding again the landscape of disparity in North Texas. So I had the chance to just start with a whiteboard and say, all right, if I want to make sure that this process is equitable, those are the process and factors that I have to take into account. Then I had a great team. We built, the technology, wrote the algorithm, and invested in that technology to be able to treat thousands of applications in just a couple of months. So we are in current discussion with the city of Dallas to evaluate whether or not we could be, another partner for that second round of funding that's likely coming. So, given that we are a housing authority and we have huge administrative responsibilities in administering some of the largest program in the country, we have to evaluate the extent to which, we can be part of that solution. So I'm crossing fingers that we can. But no, to go back to the question, we invented that process. So we are the only one having it right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think in the chat, someone also asked about, is there someone that can communicate these ideas and thoughts in Spanish? I know here at Dallas Area Habitat, we have homeowner services folks that can work with individuals that are Spanish speaking. I'm sure DHA has an opportunity for those that speak Spanish as well to be able to communicate with someone at DHA for assistance.
That's correct, yes. And also our application was multilingual, so we did both Spanish and Vietnamese. I would be happy to get this presentation translated if that's the desire. I can do that. I can get somebody in house to do it.
Yeah, so we'll be sure. Everyone, again, thanks for joining us. We're at the end of our summit. Thank you, Dr. Miriam for joining our time today. Really appreciate all that you provided. We'll be giving the presentations for all the panelists. We'll be putting it on our Dallas Area Habitat website. We've recorded this summit. We'll be uploading that recording as well to the Dallas Area Habitat website. All of those individuals that registered will be emailing the information to you as well. I sincerely appreciate you for spending your morning with your cup of coffee. Maybe you were in your jammies, but I appreciate you spending your morning with us today to learn and to talk and discuss affordable housing across the city of Dallas. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees. There's a wizard behind the curtain that's been helping for today. She's a part of the Dallas Area Habitat team. Liz, thank you so much for your work, your tireless work day in and day out to help make this happen. Continue to stay connected, friends. Stay connected with Dallas Area Habitat. There's a variety of ways on social media that you can do that. Again, if you're interested in being a Dallas Area Habitat homeowner, you can check out our website. There's a link for that as well. And advocacy, you've heard it throughout this time. Policy and advocacy is critically important to ensure that we are doing what needs to be done to serve entire populations. We do want to remain and be that world-class city where people can live, work, and play in the city of Dallas. And that takes advocacy. Email, call, and connect with your elected officials and let them know how important affordable housing is to you personally and to us as a city. I appreciate your time here today. I wish I had like some music and a little tap dance as we leave our time this morning, but you all have a wonderful day. Be well.